Hi, I'm Doug Kyleholtz, and this is my Module 4 assignment for FTH 202 at Sonoran Desert's Pistol Expert Certificate Program. I'm really excited today because we're getting to do a trigger job without actually touching the trigger. What I mean by that is we're going to go through and we're going to address all the high spots. But we want to go ahead and start off with a baseline here. We want to make sure that we know what the trigger pull weight is to start with, and if we can get anything without touching any of the geometry on the very critical parts that keep this weapon safe. And we want to see if we can polish up and dress up some of the spots that make it very difficult. So before we go through and we do our baseline, we want to make sure that one, our weapon is completely clear, and two, there's no ammunition on or around our workspace before we do anything else. So the only thing that resembles ammunition is going to be my snap caps, which I need all throughout today, based off of, or all throughout this assignment, because I'm going to be taking the weapon apart, putting it back together, doing functions checks and dry fires repeatedly to ensure that we're getting all the high spots down. Additionally, for part one, you're going to need your snap caps, you're going to need a trigger pull gauge, and you're also going to need a vise. Whenever we get to part two, we'll describe the parts that you'll need there, and then for part three as well, or correction, part four, whenever we go and do the headspace check on these revolvers. So we're going to get set up for part one. While we do so, let's make sure we're being as safe as possible. Get your safety glasses on, because we never know when something critical could happen and take out our eyeballs. So we'll be right back with you whenever we get everything mounted up into our vise. For our trigger pull weight test, we have to do some both single and double action. So I've put my snap caps inside the cylinder, and we're about ready to go. I'll go through and reset my toggles back down to where they need to be every time after every pull. And I'll go ahead and write my averages for single action, then double action on my card here, so I can have them for later reference. All right, so starting off, let's do single action first. So we'll get everything aligned. We're going to put the shoe in the center of the trigger, start our pull, and just wait for it to break. So that came up at 5 pounds. Back to 0. Setting it up again for single action. Okay, that one went to 4.75. Last one for single action. Okay, that broke just over 5, but we'll call it 5. All right, we'll average that. Here's our double action. Okay, first one, reset to 0. Okay, that hit at 10 3/4 pounds. That was 11. Back to 0. And that was 10 1/4. Okay, we're going to go ahead and get set up for part two, and we'll talk you through the items that you'll need for part two whenever you go through to do this on your own revolver. We'll be right back. Just so you can get set up as well, we're going to take this all the way down to the stripped frame. So it'll be a completely detailed disassembly, but we're not going to do it on this video. Reference my first video, which will give the entire detailed strip of this Taurus 856. For part two, there's quite a few things that we're going to need to actually accomplish knocking down these high spots if you still have burrs or anything inside your revolver. So starting off from this side of the table, moving on, definitely going to need personal protective equipment. If you end up using like a buffing wheel, any type of polish, things like that, you're going to want to use a respirator. A dust mask at the least, but a respirator, make sure you're in a well-ventilated area. Definitely going to want some type of wet dry sandpaper. I've got 800 grit and 1000 grit. You're going to want rags to wipe things down with. All right, I have my polish of choice, which is Flitz, and I'm using Q-tips as the applicator. I will also use my universal pistol block, so I've got something to hold it up with. For disassembly, definitely having your mallets, but also to do your checks at the end to ensure that all modifications that have been done are still safe within industry standards. All right, you're going to want cutting oil and an array of small files. So these are small needle files here, and then we have ceramic stones that we'll use with the oil as well. For part two, with the revolver fully disassembled, we're going to go through and look for high spots on any any surface that we may have, whether it be on the actual part itself or it be on the side plate or within the frame. I've already done a little bit of work on this and was really surprised to see that most of my high spots actually had flushed themselves out after firing 150 rounds through this revolver. So very surprised at the outcome. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to go ahead and coat every working surface that I have on here that looks like it has rub with either layout fluid. I can use liquid blue or a marker, or if you really want to go old school, keep all this stuff away from it, you can use a candle and soot it. But we're going to coat the surfaces real quick. So what it'll look like is this. So I'm just going to go ahead and hit this entire outer surface. I'm going to soak a Q-tip for all the smaller avenues that I can't get to, and we'll go through and find out where we have rub. All right, once we're done coating it, we'll reassemble the firearm completely, put snap caps in it, and dry fire. Once you have the revolver fully assembled, go ahead and throw the snap caps in there and dry fire. And I mean, like, seriously dry fire. Like, do 100. If you do 100, probably do more. But dry fire so that you know that everything is in proper working order. As for when we disassemble it again to find out where the wear marks are, we're going to want to hit those high spots with files, sandpaper, and ceramic stones. Just make sure you keep everything as flat as possible to include with the parts. Make sure that you're maintaining as much of the geometry as possible. Don't go through and break up solid lines and whatnot. And always use some type of oil to make sure that you're not embedding a lot of the metal fibers into your stones and files and ruining forever. It's a very slow process. You'll continue to rinse and repeat on this. When it comes to the stonework and sanding, filing, and whatnot, I didn't have too much filing to do. I worked on 4 primary areas, 2 parts particularly. That would be the left side of the trigger and the hammer. I had 2 different places on the hammer in particular, but smoothed them all up so that there was less resistance. Same within here. After firing, most of my high spots were knocked down, and then I just smoothed up the side plate on the inside a little bit. After our polish job and going through and changing out our 2 springs, the main string and the trigger spring, the feel of the double action is second to none. I mean, it is so smooth. And the single action is also nice and crisp. I just wonder if it'll pass the mallet test. Here we used our 8-ounce mallet to go through and smack the butt of the revolver's grip to see if the hammer would fall in single action. This is to emulate a 6-foot fall, which is the industry standard for drops of weapons. Okay, for part 4 of our assignment today, we've got to go through and conduct a headspace check. So to do that, we're going to start off with our go gauge, start it in the top cylinder. We'll rotate that cylinder to lock in place in line with the bore. That one passed, so let's go ahead and pull it real quick, and we will mark that cylinder to the left-hand side. All right, so that's number 1. The double check, we'll continue around with that go gauge, locking every single cylinder in place, like so, and marking to ensure it's good, it's locked in place. And then we'll do the exact same thing with the no-go gauge. So going back to our first cylinder here. Let's see, that's our go. Here's our no-go. We'll try and push it through. It will not make it past the flare out here for the recoil shield. So long story short, no-go, can't go. That's exactly why it's called what it is. So I would continue around checking each cylinder all the way around, marking as I go as well. Okay, at the close here, here are our measurements. We averaged a starting single action of 4.9 pounds and a double action of about 10.8. After doing the trigger job, we're down to an average of 3 1/4 and roughly 7 to 7.5. It does vary up to 8 pounds. I found that messing around with it does differentiate it a bit. Other modifications we didn't talk about was I completely swapped out the ejector rod, or the extractor rod, and I also got a new set of grips, which changed its accuracy. I had a blast with this one. This was so much fun to do, and I'd be interested to see how much stress and strain we're supposed to put on these, because the 16-ounce mallet, slamming it on my vise, those do actuate it and cause problems. So I would be very interested. I'll reach out to my professor and try and get some information on it as well. So hope to see you back here next week.